Number 5. Drilling holes in your head for a headache. Imagine having a migraine so bad that someone suggests drilling a hole in your skull, and you're like, yeah, sure, let's try it. Welcome to trepanation, one of humanity's oldest surgical procedures, dating back over 7,000 years. Ancient civilizations from the Incas to the Greeks to random Neolithic tribes all thought, you know what this person needs? A window in their brain. Here's the wild part. They weren't completely insane. Trepanation was actually used to treat head injuries, and in some cases, it worked. When you get a traumatic brain injury, your skull can trap blood and fluid, creating pressure that can literally kill you. By drilling a hole, ancient surgeons were performing a primitive form of decompression, releasing that pressure and giving the brain room to swell without squishing itself to death. Archaeologists have found skulls with these holes that show clear signs of healing, meaning people actually survived the procedure and lived for years afterward. Some skulls have multiple holes, suggesting these folks were either incredibly unlucky or kept going back for tune-ups like it was an oil change. But here's where it gets weird. They also used trepanation to treat headaches, epilepsy, and mental illness, drilling holes to let the evil spirits out. Spoiler alert, evil spirits were not the problem. However, the placebo effect might have been strong enough to make people feel better, or maybe the trauma of having your skull violated just made you forget about your original headache. Either way, your ancestors were out here performing neurosurgery with stone tools and zero anesthesia, proving that humans have always been willing to try the absolute most extreme solution first. Modern medicine calls this last resort. Ancient humans called it Tuesday. Number 4. Eating moldy bread to fight infections. Picture this. You're a peasant in ancient Egypt, your foot is infected, and the local healer hands you a piece of moldy bread and says, "Eat this." You'd probably think you were being pranked, but joke's on you. This disgusting snack might actually save your life. Ancient Egyptians, Chinese, and various other cultures used moldy bread, soil, and fermented plant matter to treat wounds and infections. They had no idea what bacteria or antibiotics were, but they noticed that certain types of mold seemed to stop infections from getting worse. Fast forward a few thousand years, and Alexander Fleming discovers penicillin in 1928, a literal mold that kills bacteria. Turns out those ancient healers were accidentally dosing people with natural antibiotics. The mold growing on bread, especially in warm, humid climates, often contained Penicillium species, the same genus Fleming isolated. So when they slapped moldy bread on a wound or fed it to someone, they were essentially giving them a primitive antibiotic treatment. Now, was this consistently effective? Absolutely not. Sometimes the mold was harmless, sometimes it was the right kind of bacteria-killing hero, and sometimes it was a completely different fungus that made things worse, because nature is a chaotic nightmare. But enough people survived that the practice stuck around for centuries. The human body is also surprisingly good at fighting off infections on its own, so even if the moldy bread did nothing, people still healed and gave the bread credit. It's like wearing your lucky socks to a job interview. You got the job, but was it really the socks? In this case, sometimes it actually was the socks, or the mold. You get the idea. Basically, ancient medicine was a game of trial, error, and hoping you didn't accidentally poison yourself while trying to cure a scraped knee. Number 3. Bloodletting to balance your humors. For thousands of years, doctors looked at sick people and thought, you know what would fix this? Less blood. Bloodletting was the go-to medical treatment from ancient Greece all the way through the 19th century. The logic was based on the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which supposedly needed to be balanced for good health. Too much blood? Time to crack out the leeches or open a vein and let some spill out. Fever? Bleed them. Headache? Bleed them. Stubbed toe? Believe it or not, also bleed them. Here's the absolutely bonkers part. In very specific cases, bloodletting actually worked. If someone had hemochromatosis, a condition where the body stores too much iron, removing blood is literally the modern treatment. Ancient doctors had no clue about iron overload, but they stumbled into the right answer by accident. Similarly, bloodletting could temporarily lower blood pressure in people with hypertension, which might have provided short-term relief. And in cases of polycythemia, where you have too many red blood cells, reducing blood volume is medically necessary. So while 99% of the time bloodletting was somewhere between useless and actively harmful, that 1% of accidental success kept the practice alive for millennia. The real kicker is that doctors were so convinced of bloodletting's effectiveness that they bled people for everything, including conditions where losing blood was the worst possible idea. George Washington probably died because his doctors drained half his blood supply while treating a throat infection. But hey, at least those few people with hemochromatosis got accidentally cured while everyone else just got weaker and more confused. Your ancient physician was basically playing medical roulette, and occasionally the chamber was empty. Number 2. Honey on wounds. Because sweet treats heal. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with honey. They put it in their food, their religious offerings, and all over open wounds. To a modern person, this sounds like a great way to attract ants and make a mess. But ancient healers were onto something genuinely brilliant. Honey is a legitimate antibacterial agent, and medical-grade honey is still used in hospitals today for wound care. Here's the science. Honey has an extremely low water content and high sugar concentration, which creates an environment where bacteria literally can't survive. It sucks the moisture out of bacterial cells through osmosis, effectively mummifying them. Honey also produces hydrogen peroxide when it comes into contact with bodily fluids, giving it natural antiseptic properties. On top of that, it's acidic enough to inhibit bacterial growth, but gentle enough not to damage tissue. So when ancient Egyptians slathered honey on cuts, burns, and surgical wounds, they were applying a substance that killed bacteria, reduced inflammation, and kept wounds moist for better healing. They didn't know about microbiology, but they knew that honey-treated wounds got infected less often than untreated ones, and that was enough. The Egyptians also mixed honey with grease and lint to make wound dressings, which sounds disgusting, but was actually a proto-bandage that protected injuries while delivering antibacterial benefits. Meanwhile, other cultures were rubbing dirt and mystery herbs into wounds and wondering why people kept dying of sepsis. Modern medicine has circled back to using medical-grade honey, specifically Manuka honey, for treating burns, ulcers, and antibiotic-resistant infections. So ancient Egyptians were accidentally practicing evidence-based medicine, while the rest of the world was still convinced that drilling holes in skulls would fix mental illness. Basically, they stumbled into one of nature's perfect wound care products and just ran with it for 3,000 years. Number 1. Drinking mercury for immortality. Ancient Chinese alchemists had a wild idea. If you want to live forever, just drink liquid metal, mercury specifically. Emperors and nobles were chugging mercury-laced elixirs because they believed it would grant them immortality, spiritual enlightenment, or at least a really impressive lifespan. Spoiler alert, it did the exact opposite. Mercury is insanely toxic, and multiple Chinese emperors died from mercury poisoning while trying to become immortal, which is perhaps the most ironic way to go. But here's the weird twist. Mercury compounds actually did have some legitimate medical uses, and ancient doctors accidentally stumbled onto them. Mercury was used to treat syphilis for centuries, and while it was absolutely poisonous and caused horrific side effects, it did sometimes work. Mercury compounds can kill the bacteria that cause syphilis, though the treatment was often worse than the disease. People lost their teeth, their hair, and sometimes their minds. But hey, at least the syphilis was slightly better. Mercury was also used as a diuretic and a laxative, which makes sense because poisoning yourself does tend to make your body evacuate everything immediately. The Chinese weren't alone in their mercury obsession. Ancient Indians used mercury in Ayurvedic medicine, and European alchemists were equally convinced that mercury held mystical properties. The problem is that mercury accumulates in your body over time, slowly destroying your kidneys, brain, and nervous system. So while a tiny controlled dose might have had some antibacterial effect, the drink it regularly for immortality approach was basically a slow motion suicide pact. The irony is that mercury's legitimate medical uses were completely overshadowed by people's determination to drink way too much of it in the name of eternal life. Your body doesn't become immortal. It becomes a toxic waste site. But sure, let's call it enlightenment.